As a 23-year-old female, I can tell you that it's difficult to be a young woman right now. Yes, we know that many people refuse to even define a woman anymore, but the malaise goes beyond that. Most men are interested in one thing, and it's not courtship. The pickings on dating apps are frankly depressing. And women have been brainwashed into thinking that if we capitulate to men and participate in meaningless casual sex, we will be as fulfilled as men. But many just wake up the next morning not feeling empowered, but feeling used. Dating and commitment are at an all-time low. 25% of Americans over 40 have never been married. And the worst part is that a lot of women feel trapped in this culture that we don't like, don't want, and see no way out of. Today, I welcome Carrie Gress to the show, author of The End of Woman, How Smashing the Patriarchy Destroyed Us, to discuss all of these developments and more. I'm Julie Hartman, and this is Timeless. Hey everyone, welcome to Timeless. It's great to be with you. Just a reminder to hit the subscribe button down below so that you can stay notified with every post, and also to follow me on Instagram and Twitter at Julie R. Hartman. On top of that, as you know, you can always email me at julie@julie-hartman.com, and I love hearing from you. I only regret that I can't respond to each of you. Carrie Gress is a prolific author of several books, many of which are about religion and Catholicism. She's a fellow at the Washington, D.C. based think tank called the Ethics and Public Policy Center, and she has written several articles about a wide range of commentary in the National Review, the Daily Caller, the Daily Wire, Newsweek, Real Clear Politics, the Epoch Times, the Federalist, the Washington Examiner, and more. As mentioned, today we'll be discussing her most recent book, The End of Woman, How Smashing the Patriarchy Has Destroyed Us. Hi, Carrie. Welcome to the show. Thanks for being here.
Hi, Julie. Thanks so much for having me. It's great to be here.
So I am a huge Epoch Times fan. I get the subscription of the newspaper that comes once a week in print. I'm like an old person. I read the newspaper in print as opposed to online. And I could be so wrong about this, but did you recently publish an article there about how to make a home? Was that you?
I probably did, actually. Yeah, maybe a few months back. I submit to them regularly. It's, I don't have any kind of deadline, so it's sort of intermittent whenever the inspiration strikes. But I have a blog and books called Theology of Home. So it's absolutely something that I spend a lot of time thinking about, writing about, and certainly publishing about regularly.
You just pump out so much content. I love that you don't even remember if you wrote the article, which is fine. I mean, if I were pumping out that much content too, I probably wouldn't remember. But I think it was you, and I loved the article. It was in the Life and Tradition section, I believe, about the importance of making a great home, how it's kind of your greatest accomplishment in life if you do that effectively. So even if it wasn't you, I'm going to give you the credit for it. I think it was.
Well, I will take it. And, that's the main theme of the Theology of Home projects that I've been involved in are just to focus on the fact that we've made homemaking taboo, and yet the home is so instrumental, and all the things about the home are really back in style. So, we live in interesting times when we've got that juxtaposition.
Yes, indeed. So how did you become interested in this subject, and when did you realize in your life that feminism was not all that it is cracked up to be?
I actually never wanted to write about women's issues. I think when I was a graduate student, I said audibly, I will never write. I will never be, a thinker in the realm of women. And I just started moving more gradually into it because I was starting a family, and I just realized that there were so many things that we were being told that just weren't true, or that just didn't sit well. It was sort of like I was trying to put all the pieces together and I couldn't find the last piece to make everything fit properly. And so that was, I think, what really has led me to start thinking through this and just figuring out what's missing. And I have a PhD in philosophy, and so it's been just great to be able to use those skills to go back and look at feminism and say, there's a problem here, there's a problem here, and there's a problem there, and really be able to write about it, but hopefully in a way that is compelling and accessible. And I think that's one of the reasons why I didn't want to get involved in women's work, because it just seemed so academic and inaccessible. And I wanted something that I could give to my mom and my friends, and help them really see the damage that's happening in the culture because of feminism. And so that's kind of been the big motivation.
Well, you have been so effective in doing it. I told you before the show that I loved reading your book. And one of the best parts, those who are watching know that I'm a total history nerd, so it's not shocking to them that this was the part that I enjoyed the most. I really appreciated the history that you provided of feminism, starting with the serpent seduction of Eve, kind of going through to Meghan Markle, of all people. Can you provide us with a synopsis of that history?
Yeah. Well, I went back to the beginning of feminism, really the 1780s, 1790s with Mary Wollstonecraft, because I thought, and actually I had already done some work on later feminism, sort of from the 1960s on. And I thought, well, let me just go back and look and see what's there and sort of check it out. Because I had always heard, what happened was that feminism was hijacked. And so there was this big shift that took place in the 60s. And so that early feminism was actually good. So I thought, let me just, I'll spend a day or two going back and looking. And, of course, when I started to dig, I just kept finding more and more, awful content that was incredibly shocking. And one of the pieces really was this idea of rereading Adam and Eve and Genesis 3 and making Eve a heroine, making Eve a victim, making the serpent, providing Eve with this incredible opportunity instead of, the fall that happened. So that's really, one of where the feminist movement in a lot of respects was really kicked off. And most people don't know it actually was a man that articulated a lot of it. It was Percy Shelley, who was the son-in-law of Mary Wollstonecraft. So while his wife, Mary Shelley, is writing Frankenstein, he's writing about this woman named Sitna, who's the very first independent woman. She has no husband and no children. And this is really what caught fire for the feminist movement. He really put all these pieces together in a way that I don't think anybody else had before. And then these same pieces you see consistently really throughout the movement up until our own day.
So what about Meghan Markle? What's your take on her?
Yeah, so Meghan was fun to include because there's just so much to hate about Meghan. Really, I mean,
True.
It's into it, over and over again. But she enters into it because I compare Mary Wollstonecraft, who is considered the godmother of feminism, because of the fact that she first started talking about women in this in a more in terms of a revolution. But she was also very focused on how do we get rid of the hierarchy, how do we get rid, how do we collapse culture down into sort of more egalitarian notion. And so she doesn't want monarchy. She doesn't want the church. She doesn't want anything that even the military, all those things she thinks need to be collapsed down. And so you can sort of see the echoes of this in Meghan Markle, who of course is not a big fan of monarchy either. So I part of the reason I brought Meghan into was not just to show these echoes that happen throughout time, but I think also to help women understand that these ideas, have had consequences, and they are fresh and something that we deal with every day instead of just sort of these historical, antiquities that we can look at occasionally but don't have any bearing on our life. So to really bring in kind of the readability and the accessibility of these ideas in our everyday life.
I was watching old clips of Meghan Markle, and there was one talk that she was giving, and she said, women, if they don't have a seat at the table, they should pull up a seat to the table, pull up a folding chair. I think she was quoting some feminist icon in that. And I just was watching that literally a few days ago, thinking how stupid it was. What a throwaway comment. What do you mean? Just pull up a folding chair. It's these feminist icons say these empty slogans and statements that really do nothing to help women. It's just patronizing.
Yeah. And I'm super grateful that you brought that up, because I think that that's one of the things that was so striking to me, especially about contemporary feminism, is just how vapid the remarks are. And there's just nobody to check them. There's nobody to say that's so dumb. And, you see Kamala Harris making these statements and you realize okay, Gloria Steinem said things like this for years. I think maybe that's where she got a lot of these ideas. But no one is actually checking them to push back and say, like, what do you even mean by that? Can you give us some clarity on this? And so I think, it happens a little bit at The View because some people are paying attention to The View, but by and large, there's just so many incredible things. I should probably start a blog just alone with these ridiculous comments that are made, on a daily basis about what women ought to do and be and imagine themselves as.
You are so right. Someone just needs to stand up and raise their hand when Kamala is speaking and go, what do you mean when you say we need to move forward untethered by what has been and unburdened by who we can become? What are you talking about? Root this in reality. I'll read your blog about that, Carrie. There will be endless examples for you to cite. So in this discussion of the history of feminism, I often hear when I have conversations with people about this, individuals make the argument that feminism started off as a really positive, good force. If you go back a century ago, it was in 1920 when the 19th Amendment was passed, granting women the right to vote. And then from there, feminists were pushing for women to have to be able to be in the workforce at the same rates as men. And so I hear a lot of people saying that feminism started off really good, and then now it's kind of morphed into this really fundamentally anti-women branch, offshoot. Do you agree with this assessment that feminism was once a good force and now it's corrupted? Or do you see feminism as a force in general as always kind of being defective?
Yeah, I think that was the narrative that I believed for a long time until I really started digging into this. And, the first problem with that, there's many problems with that once you start looking at the actual characters in it. I mentioned Percy Shelley and Mary Wollstonecraft already, but there's also Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Susan B. Anthony. These are major figures that most people think of, or not Percy Shelley so much, but the others, when they're thinking about feminism, and they think that there's just this great purity and it was really just about how do we help women. And to a certain degree, it really was, how do we help women? But the problem is they started with the wrong question. They didn't start with how do we help women as women. They started with how do we help women become more like men? Because they looked around in their lives and they thought, men have a much easier life. Why can't we just start sort of nudging women closer to their lives and curtailing their fertility and all of these kinds of things. So that's the first problem, and that's from the very almost the very start. Then you enter into some other significant problems, which are there are three main characteristics identified in early feminism that we can again see echoing and spilling over into contemporary feminism. The first one is that idea of egalitarianism, which of course Mary Wollstonecraft was the herald of. That ends up becoming this idea of smashing the patriarchy, that, the patriarchy is to blame for everything. And that happens later, but that's really the seed idea. So that's the first thing. The second problem is it's connected with this notion of free love. Again, this idea of how do we make women more like men? Getting rid of monogamy, getting rid of the family, getting rid of all these ways in which women are actually protected in their vulnerability, and just sent out into the world to just fend for themselves. And of course, the extreme damage that does to civilization as well. And then the third problem is just this incredible amount of the occult that was involved in the early feminists. Elizabeth Cady Stanton was very much involved with seances and mediums, and even her idea for the Seneca Falls Convention happened at this spirit table that she used to communicate with the world beyond. And that these are sort of is a tamer example, but that was absolutely a piece that was playing in it. And she was trying to undercut Christianity and really move women to this place where women didn't need men for anything. They didn't need a Christian pastor. They didn't need a pastor. They didn't need a rabbi. They didn't need a priest. They just they could go to their own spirit table and communicate with in seances, and that was all they needed for their spirituality. So there were some massive problems that I think feminism has been very happy to sort of shove under the carpet. And that was really the interesting thing about this, though, was that all the research I did was all from very pro-feminist people. I didn't have to go to people that were against feminism. I just had to use the sources, the original sources or secondary sources to find this content, and then sort of triangulate all of it and start seeing these patterns emerge. And these were the very clear ones.
So if I understand you correctly, and of course, please jump in if I'm wrong, although I'll say modern feminism had some great components like granting women suffrage and trying to advocate for women to be in the workforce, there were also kind of the seeds of the more malignant parts that we see today, such as women don't need men.
Right. And, I think it's these, the movement is like a brand. It has to do something good for women. Otherwise, women aren't going to adhere to it. So there has to be some sort of, candy involved in this. And it's not only candy, it's also guilt. I mean, we hear this all the time. I've heard this recently, how dare you attack feminism because of it, it's given you the capacity to get your advanced degree and to work and, all of these kinds of things, which, there's not really a lot of clear evidence that it has come from this feminist model per se, that was the only way in which we had to do it. You didn't have to take down all of society for these things to happen. There were certainly other paths to achieve these things. So that's certainly a real problem. But yeah, I think the bigger piece is that feminism ultimately has really made us think differently about ourselves and, think much more like Marxists. And this, of course, happened in the 1900s. And, we can talk about Betty Friedan and all of that if you want. But that's really fundamentally what has happened is we think of ourselves as Marxists women who are made to work. But we're not made for the home. We're not made for fertility. We're not made to raise children. We're not made to have families and be wives. So all of these pieces have been sort of cut out because of this goal of making us, uniquely career women.
Mm-hmm. It's so interesting when people come at you and me. I mean, I've had people say this to me. How dare you criticize feminism when it's created the conditions that have allowed you to have your own talk show or get a higher, education degree. I never understood that argument. So do I either have to be totally anti-feminism or totally pro-feminism? Can't I exist somewhere in the middle or even more to one side than another and recognize that there have been some great parts of it, some great outcomes, but also that there are issues? It's just in every issue, it seems in our society, we're reduced to a very simplistic viewpoint, which is just wrong.
Well, and I think you're right in that respect too, because feminism has not just defined itself, but it's defined the opposition very, very well. I mean, look at the red hats and the red robes of the Handmaid's Tale that are always marched out anytime there's any kind of controversy. I mean, this is their way of indicating what the opposition must look like, and creating all this fear and the sense of that you have to, you're just a doormat if in fact you believe anything other than what they believe. So it's absolutely very, binary. It's got to be one or the other. There's no sort of happy middle for the movement and the narrative.
Yes, well said. We have to choose a binary, which is ironic because I thought we're also supposed to embrace this idea that things are not binary, but we'll leave that aside.
Exactly.
As another list of many contradictions in the modern worldview. So you said a few moments ago, and I want to follow up, that feminism has changed us as people, both women and men, I would imagine you believe. How?
Well, I'll start with men because it's an easier place to start. I think feminism is like kryptonite for men. I think that they have, feminism has, it's the best way to stop a conversation. If somebody asks me what I do and I don't want to talk to them, I can just say I write about feminism. It's sort of, it's a conversation stopper. Almost as good as says I have a doctorate in philosophy. Nobody wants to talk about those things. So I think that's the tragic part, is that it's been highly effective in really shutting men down and really ignoring and overlooking the incredible gifts that they have and that they bring to society and that they do every day that we just don't acknowledge because we don't find them valuable. So I think that's a major piece. And of course, the damage that it's done to the family. You mentioned dating previously, all these kinds of things I think are at the feet of what feminism has gifted us. But as for women in particular, the real change has been that we, again, think of ourselves in very Marxist terms. And this is, the fruit of Betty Friedan's work, The Feminine Mystique, where, there's a lot of evidence that Friedan was absolutely communist. She's using Marxist ideas in her writing. She did it just in a very masterful way where she was able to make it clear. She's making these arguments from a psychological perspective instead of a philosophical perspective. So she's encouraging women to sort of feel like they're victims already because they're in this comfortable concentration camp. That's her language of the home. And she's trying to encourage women to get out into to doing productive work. I mean, this is part of the Marxist vision, was that women would only be free if they were working outside the home, that raising children wasn't productive enough. So she has created in the minds of almost all of us this belief, and feminism has just ridden off of this, that we can be these independent women. We don't need anyone or anything as long as we've kind of got our career, and that's really what we should be focused on instead of family and raising children and whatnot. All of those other things are sort of either obstacles or kind of, like getting a driver's license or carrying a handbag or something. They're not essential to who we are as women. And I think that that's one of the most fundamental things. So we can't really even talk about what a good woman is anymore, because we don't really understand that term. We can think of a successful woman, but we don't know how to really define what we would mean by even a good woman.
I remember, Carrie, reading parts of Friedan's The Feminine Mystique in high school, and I was a liberal back then, and I was a self-proclaimed feminist back then. My views have evolved considerably from then to now. However, I even recall at the time thinking that Betty Friedan herself, in criticizing the quote-unquote stereotypes about women, kind of adopted them herself, where she reduced women to just homemakers and just wives and et cetera. But she kind of used the term just, I mean, as if it's a job that doesn't mean anything. I mean, the most important job is being a wife and a mother and a homemaker. Andrew Clavin talks about this beautifully, I think, where he says that women nowadays don't appreciate and understand the very important responsibility that they have, and that literally in carrying a child, they are vessels, the vessels that God has chosen to bring new life into this world. I mean, that is a great honor, and that is a beautiful thing. And of course, that doesn't mean that, women should only be wives and mothers, and they should never go beyond that, never go to graduate school, never go in the workforce. No one is saying that, but to toss out the wife and mother thing, as Betty Friedan does, like it's something superfluous and inconsequential and something we should be ashamed of, that is deeply offensive to the beauty of womanhood.
Yeah, and I think it goes back again to that fundamental question of how do we make women more like men? I mean, men aren't home; they're not raising their children typically. I mean, obviously there are exceptions, but this was the goal, was to get women out of the home and producing something, and finding their freedom through that. So yeah, it's incredibly tragic just how extreme the movement really has been. And, it's led, of course, right into the trans movement, because of the fact that none of these things, the biological realities of the fact that, I was the home for my 5 children, in my body before anything else. Those realities are all tossed aside as unimportant and insignificant and highly changeable too. That we can just, start chopping and injecting, and therefore we can make women into men and vice versa.
Mm-hmm. A lot of people would probably say, Julie, Carrie, we agree with you that this feminist movement has gone too far. The push to make women like men has led to this. Women are no different from men. Women want casual, meaningless sex as much as men. Women, can be called women as long as they say that they identify as a woman. They would say, okay, I agree with you that feminism has led in a bad direction. However, this is a unfortunate but kind of inevitable offshoot of the push to get women more in the workforce and have more rights with men. In other words, I think they would say, like, just as a chocolate chip cookie is really good, it also makes you fat. The feminist movement has some really good parts, and kind of inevitably these bad parts have emerged. How would you respond to that? Is there a world, if we could go back 100 years, how would we get all of the good things of feminism and avoiding all of the bad things that have come out of it?
Well, I going back, I think you have to really look at, and this is where you can get into the weeds, but you have to look at the work of someone like Simone de Beauvoir and the existentialists. And recognize that this is what they were gunning for, was this concept of how do we encourage people to reinvent themselves in any way in which they want to, and think that they can do anything that they want. I mean, this is where a lot of the extremism comes from. All the idea of how do we get rid of gender altogether. I mean, these things go so far beyond ideologically, so far beyond anything like work, and working and voting and education and all of those kinds of things. I think that there's a lot of evidence to show that many of those things are happening already. You've got, as you know, with history, whenever there's a rise in the middle class, there's going to be more opportunity. I think technology has changed significantly. I know when I need to do a load of laundry, I just push a button and things are washed. This is, historically not the case prior to the last century, even the last 50 years, things being that easy. So I think we have a lot more time as women than we used to have. So all of those things are shifting. I don't think that, but we didn't really need to destroy all of civilization to get these things. And I think that's what we sort of need to help women untether, that these ideas actually have to go together. They don't, in fact, they're not an easy fit. The opportunities that women have could have been achieved without all of this, diabolical nature and diabolical transitioning happening in the culture at large. And, even this idea of vilifying men and putting women on a pedestal, making the lesbian relationship, a thing of primacy, all of those things were happening in the 70s as well. So I think there's a lot of damage that has been done that didn't need to be done. And, continuing to push feminism as some sort of beneficial thing for women is clearly not working for women. Women are not showing any amount of an increase in happiness. In fact, it's just the opposite. We can see from all of the data that women are less happy now than they were, when feminism began. So it's these kinds of things that I think we have to look at carefully, instead of just going with the flow and saying, well, this is bad and that's bad. We have to see that the bad pieces that we don't like are actually at their core, coming from this very disordered ideology.
Mm-hmm. So it's not inevitable, in other words.
No.
Yes.
Exactly. That's the short answer. It's not inevitable. Yeah.
I appreciate that you brought up technology, because if I look at the history of feminism or the sexual revolution, there's really been two components: the cultural push and then the advent of certain technologies. As you said, the washing machine, which has made women's homework far less time consuming and more efficient. Of course, contraception, the pill, the abortion being legalized in the 70s, early 70s. So kind of going back to the inevitability question, let's look at the pill, because the pill was such a transformative thing. Jordan Peterson compares it to the atomic bomb, in the sense of how it just radically changed our culture, and that literally for the first time in human history, women could have sex and not worry if they were going to have a child. And so that severed sex from responsibilities. And furthermore, it severed sex from commitment. So my question for you is, with the advent of the pill, it sort of seems like it might be inevitable that this kind of hookup culture emerges in the wake of that technological development that has given women a lot more sexual freedom. Is that true? Or, apropos of my previous question, was there a way to have that technology and cut out the bad parts that came after it?
Yeah, I haven't seen a workaround in terms of how do you cut out the bad parts, because of the fact that it damages so deeply that the nuclear family and the communication, and when you get rid of fertility from sex, it's sort of like what we've done with food in a certain respect. We've gotten rid of the nutrition, and we're wondering why we're overweight and not healthy, because we're not actually eating food for the sake of nourishing our bodies, but it's for the taste. So we know that there are consequences when those kinds of inborn concepts are separated and broken up. And I think the other problem too is that you have, because of the pill, abortion was necessitated. I mean, this is even argued in the Supreme Court, was this idea that if contraception fails, then you have to have abortion backed up to it. So the one leads to the next. And I think, again, what we're doing is answering that question: how do we make women more like men? And so we're just erasing altogether our fertility, our motherhood, all of those aspects of who we are as women. So I don't think that there's a real workaround there because of just the way our human nature is, and the way that we've been created, and the way in which we work together. I mean, if you look at even what has happened with relationships with men and women, there's not one area that you can say, oh, well, they're improved in this area. It's all what we're being fed is sort of this diet of envy, that we need to envy everything that men have, and we need to just grasp after that, instead of what is it we have, and that we should be making our strength and going from strength to strength, instead of trying to transform ourselves into someone else altogether.
Forgive me for interrupting you there for a moment, but wow, I never made that connection, even in all my reading about this, that the pill has really kind of spurred the abortion necessity and movement.
Yeah, because if you weren't intending to get pregnant and you get pregnant, then absolutely that's absolutely the fire for it.
Wow. I just wanted to pinpoint that. Before we continue with Carrie, I want to quickly tell you about My Pillow. As many of you know, I use many My Pillow products. I walk into work wearing the My Slippers and then put on heels at the last moment. I sleep on the My Pillow and the Giza Dream bed sheets. I use the My Towel sets, and you can too at a discount if you use the promo code Hartman, which is my last name spelled Hartman. For a limited time, you'll get 60% off of the Giza Dream bed sheets. That comes with a 60-day money-back guarantee and a 10-year warranty. You'll get a set for as low as $39.99 with the promo code Hartman. Just go to mypillow.com and click on the radio listener square and use the promo code Hartman, or call 1-800-566-6745, and you guessed it, use the promo code Hartman. Along with this offer, you'll get deep discounts on all My Pillow products, including the aforementioned My Pillow towel sets, the My Pillow mattress topper, and more. So, Carrie, we are living in this time, as we've been discussing, of just amazing cultural and technological transformation. As I said in the beginning of this episode, I'm 23 years old, and I can tell you, but you very well know, that it is very difficult to be a young woman right now. What advice would you give to someone like me who wants to find a man who is committed and not brainwashed by all of this feminist culture and its outgrowths? I mean, do you have any advice for young women like us, or are we kind of just caught in this culture that, as I said in the intro, we don't want, we don't like, and see no way out of?
Yeah. Well, I think the only advice that I would recommend is just to recognize that you're going to attract what you are like. And so if you just give up and say, throw up your hands and say, well, just, start adding to my body count, or, whatever, entering into that culture, that's just going to keep self-perpetuating. It's you're not going to get to the ends in which you want. You have to really focus on what kind of person is it that I want, and am I that type of person, such that you can then attract one another and build something from that, instead of like slogging through all of the brokenness. And I mean, I think that's one of the hardest things that we're dealing with, is people are so broken and confused about what relationships really are meant to be like, that it's incredibly hard to build one. But I think we can have a lot of hope that I encounter a lot of people who are just looking for a good man or a good woman, and again, it really comes down to, are you holding yourself to the same expectations that you have for a spouse, and really pushing into that. And I think that these are the things that maybe there's a shift coming. People are going to start, moving in that direction, because things have gotten so bad. And I see it even in, among older people, that people are really focused on raising a family and being married and doing the kinds of things that, the hard work that it takes to actually build a relationship, instead of just letting it happen and sort of hoping that something good will come out of it, but being very intentional and focused on what it is your goals are, but improving yourself simultaneously, instead of just living with this expectation that this person has to sort of suit me the way that I am. So anyway, yeah, I think it's incredibly hard, but this is again where, human nature enters into this. And, I can speak from my own experience. I didn't get married until I was almost 35, and my husband is 9 years older than I am. And so we both waited a very long time. And neither one of us sat around. I mean, we were both busy traveling, doing all kinds of things, and, filled our lives with things. We joke now about how we spent our retirement years, when we were younger, because we probably won't have them for a very, very long time.
Yes.
But doing those kinds of things that are going to make yourself a better person and that you're going to appreciate that you did, I think are also really important things to do. Just instead of feeling like you're in this, elevator just waiting for something to happen. I think making the most of your life and doing the things you want to do, and then from there it gets a lot easier to find like-minded people.
And as you said, there are a lot of people, and it's encouraging to hear, who want to find a traditional, in the best sense, partner. When I said I don't want a man who's succumbed or is corrupted by the feminist culture, what I mean is I don't want a man who's addicted to pornography, or who thinks that men and women are the same, or who thinks that, a woman is just any person who says that they are a woman. That's
right.
That's what I want. And frankly, I think that's what most women want. They don't want to admit it. But if they had their choice of a guy who was the guy that I just described, and then a choice of a guy who's the opposite of the guy that I described, I think they would go with the guy that I described. And yet it is still so hard.
Yeah. No, I think it's incredibly challenging, and you have my sympathies. I, have actively worked to try and help people meet one another, because I just think it's incredibly challenging times in which we live, for sure.
Yes. Well, Carrie, thank you so much for your time today. And of course, thank you for writing this book. As a reminder, it's called The End of Woman: How Smashing the Patriarchy Has Destroyed Us. I hope to be able to interview you again soon.
I'd love it. Thanks so much for having me.
And good luck. I know that you're doing a great job raising your 5 kids, but my gosh, I'm glad you had your retirement years early, as you said, because my goodness, that is a lot of work. Thanks everyone so much for joining me. I'll see you soon.